David, thanks for joining us. Less is more. Tell us about less is more in regards to feedback and assessment.
I think one of the problems with feedback from the student point of view is it can be a little bit overwhelming. There's too much information and you don't know what the key points are. So I think the key issue in feedback process is uptake of feedback. The students have the opportunity to use the feedback on a future task. They can internalize it and they can act on it, and so develop a conception that feedback is something that can be useful and actionable. If you get used to reading a lot of comments and they just seem like a lot of nitpicking and you don't know what to do with it, then it makes you think feedback is not useful. But something clear, concise and actionable would be good principles, I think, of less is more.
So picking up on that, when and how should dialogue come into the process of feedback and assessment?
I think with dialogue, the trap is to imagine dialogue as being one teacher and one student, because that's clearly impractical and too resource intensive. So in terms of feedback dialogues, I think we particularly mean peer feedback, where students are trained and coached and supported in carrying out peer feedback effectively. We're also thinking of the online space where there can be a lot of productive dialogues that can go on between different participants in a course online. And then even more importantly, there's inner dialogue. We're all thinking about what we're doing, we're thinking about how we're going, how's the timing, how's the spacing, have I written too much or too little? So I think there's a constant dialogue within oneself, within one's own mind, where you're thinking about you're doing, you're self-monitoring. And I think we need to support students to self-regulate through this inner dialogue or internal feedback more effectively. So dialogic feedback important, but different modes, not just the teacher, because we're trying to get away from teacher transmissive forms of feedback to bring in a broader conception of feedback, that there are different ways of learning from the environment, from your peers, and from teaching learning resources.
That's very helpful. Thank you, David. I want to talk a little bit about fostering stronger learner-teacher relationships. How do stronger learner-teacher relationships come into your thinking about feedback and assessment?
I think this is sometimes quite a big challenge because we often teach large classes and there's a certain amount of anonymity in a large group. But I think even in a large class, a teacher can start to build a relationship by showing their enthusiasm, their passion, but also their interest in the student, actually talking to students as individuals whenever the opportunity arises, trying to learn some names, trying to personalize, take an interest in people. And then I think trust is a very important dimension. And I think when students perceive that the teacher has their best interests at heart and is willing to go the extra mile to support them and help them and counsel them, then I think that sort of builds these relationships of trust. And I think trust is a kind of feeling, a sense, an emotional kind of feeling. And I think sometimes you can feel this teacher is there for us and will really try and help us as much as we can in the different ways we need help. So a challenging one in the context of resourcing and large classes, but if I could boil it down to one point, I think it would be demonstrating that you have students' best interests at heart.
So picking up on that notion of trust and students' best interests at heart, why don't you think more university lecturers and students see feedback and assessment as a relational process as opposed to a transaction or just a technical exercise?
I think one of the big problems with feedback relates to how we generally structure our courses, so that there's always a big assessment at the end or an exam or a final task. So a lot of the comment and the feedback comes at the end, when it seems to the student and possibly to the teacher more like a grading process than a formative process. And then when it comes at the end, obviously the student interprets any feedback through the lens of the grade. And the grade is the powerful thing because it affects their future and their graduation and their honours, etc. So the grade is so powerful that that can, I think, colour the student interpretation of the course and the teacher. And I think sometimes we need to enhance communication so that the students can negotiate a bit more with the teachers, can co-create, but also that the students can really understand the rationale for some of the things we do. And I think sometimes there are blockages when teachers and students are on somewhat different wavelengths and there isn't the mutual comprehension, the mutual communication. And then if there isn't the comprehension and the communication, then the trust breaks down and then people misunderstand things, and I think that's where we get into trouble. So I think communication, sincerity, open-mindedness to the different perspective. I mean, obviously teachers and students, we have our different viewpoints, but I think they need to be aired and negotiated, and we don't always have to agree, but we need to understand where each party is coming from.
And so what we've been talking about, if this comes into play, we start to see it more as a relationship with trust, communication, seeing different standpoints. What does that change, do you think? What does that change in the classroom environment, in the university curriculum?
I think it brings in more partnership, and I think it brings in more ownership for the students. And I think that the more we understand each other, the more we can make contributions in our own most effective ways. So, as I think you know, Kelly, I'm quite interested in linkages between the students as partners literature and feedback processes, because it seems to me that for feedback processes to work, there need to be shared responsibilities between teachers and students. Teachers need to design the assessment and the feedback in ways in which students can use it for the next task, and then students need to engage with feedback, try and make sense of it, open up a dialogue when there is an opportunity arising. They need to participate actively and sincerely in peer feedback. They need to be open to new perspectives. So I think when partnership is promoted as part of assessment and feedback designs, then I think it's potentially a win-win situation for both teachers and students.
Thanks, David. One final question, as quickly as you can. What is feedback?
To me, feedback is a dialogic process in which teachers and learners work together in order to improve work and/or learning strategies. Because I think sometimes learning strategies are the most important thing, because you don't necessarily want to know about feedback on work that's completed. You want to know how you can move forward. So students and teachers working together to improve work or learning strategies.
Wonderful. Thank you for sharing your time with us, David.
Kelly. Thank you.
Yes.